Okay.
It's Wednesday.
It's Wednesday morning, live from Winter Springs. We get to discuss a difficult topic today. I know, because I always go for the easy stuff, right? Slavery. It was a good groan. Slavery. There is slavery in the Torah, right? And there are mitzvot concerning slavery. Right? There are commandments concerning slavery, and indeed, they are among the very first commandments that we receive after the 10 Commandments. At the beginning of the next parasha, Mishpatim, all of a sudden, we're talking about slavery. Does that strike anyone else as ironic? That we have just been liberated from Egypt, that the very end of our Exodus has culminated at Mount Sinai, and we have the 10 Commandments, among which is the idea that we're going to be free to serve God, and now we're talking about slavery as being okay? It's a little bit of a head scratcher, and if you're not scratching your head, you're not paying attention. So we're going to have to try and break down, what does the Torah mean by slavery? What are the commandments regarding slavery, and why the Torah does what it does? And that's going to involve some difficult conversations about life in the past, life now, America's history, and everything in between. So hang on. We are on page 456, which is chapter 21, and verse 1. We are going to be starting right from the beginning of Mishpatim. Everyone find our page, 456, chapter 21, verse 1. Okay. Harry, can I impose upon you to read for us?
Oh, I go today.
Thank you.
These are the rules that you shall set before them. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. In the 7th year, he shall go free without payment. If he came single, he shall leave single. If he had a wife, his wife shall leave with him. If his master gave him a wife, and she has borne him children, the wife and her children shall belong to the master, and he shall leave alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master and my wife and children, I do not wish to go free, his master shall take him before God. He shall be brought to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall then remain his slave for life.
All right, so first of all, as I like to often do, start off with the correction of the translation. It does not say for life. It says literally la'olam, which would normally be translated as forever. Now, there might be a little bit of a problem with your reading of that, though. Do Hebrew slaves serve forever?
No, well, it's 6 years.
Right. No, but this is after the 6 years. The guy says, no, don't send me away. And you do the whole punch over the ear. But there's something else coming up. What? The Jubilee, right? After seven year cycles, after 49 years, everyone goes free regardless. So le'olam here cannot literally mean either for life or forever. It must mean for an uninterrupted period of time that will only be finished with the Jubilee, not with another sabbatical in the meantime. All right, so this is just a little example, first of all, of the trouble with translation, and second of all, with reading one sentence without reading the rest of the Torah, right? Can we shut the door, because that's getting a little noisy. The lovely rain here, we get, I know everywhere else they're getting snow, we get rain. So I shouldn't complain too much, but it is a bit louder than snow. Yeah, snow is much quieter. And it reinforces this idea that I've mentioned many times, and hopefully you've all taken to heart, but I'll say it again, because as we'll see, repetition does help. Every part of the Torah is informed, is elucidated, is clarified by every other part of the Torah. Right? It's when you turn the Torah to look at one piece, everything else in the Torah is there behind it, helping you to understand that one piece. You can never read one sentence by itself in isolation. Everything is connected. And this is just one example. Now we're going to go back and we're going to take apart that paragraph in just a second. But I want to get the next paragraph down as well.
You just said that in a Jubilee year, all slaves go free. Everybody loses all their slaves, and no debts are repaid, so you lose your money.
But the debts also get canceled at the 7th year as well. But
Wow.
the land reverted to the original owners.
Oh, there must be more to that.
Okay, well, I mean, so for the Jubilee, because that actually will come back into a very important part of our discussion, right? At the Jubilee, well, let's back up. Story of Joshua, right? After we settle the land, what happens is the land is divided among the different tribes. And then in each part of that tribe, each male leader of the household receives his portion of land. And that becomes his land forever, Le'olam. If he has to sell that land at the Jubilee every 49 years, that land comes back to him free, right? That land goes back. It's like when you're playing Monopoly, after you've played for 50 rounds, everything is put back in the box, the money is put back out again equally to everyone, and we go again, right? It's the giant reset button for the land. The property that you had made, the movable property, the money that you had, the furnishings you had, the clothes you'd acquired, the animals you have, all of that stays with you. So it's certainly possible for a person to enjoy and pass on the wealth and riches they've accumulated, but it's also impossible for any one family to become permanently disconnected from the land of Israel, which is the inheritance of everyone. No one person should ever, or even small group of people, should monopolize what was God's gift to all the Jewish people. So that's one of the fundamental ideas behind the Jubilee. But in the meantime, there was this thing called slavery, and that's what we're going to have to do a little bit more digging on. But first, we've talked generally about a slave. Now we're going to talk about when it's somebody selling their daughter.
Now, when a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed as male slaves are. If she proves to be displeasing to her master, who designated her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He shall not have the right to sell her to outsiders, since he broke faith with her. And if he designated her for his son, he shall deal with her as is the practice with freed maidens. If he marries another, he must not withhold from this one her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he fails her in these 3 ways, she shall go free without payment.
All right. And then after this, looking at the clock, we're probably not going to go into it too much, but after this, we begin to get into the question of how you do damage to other people, harming, hitting other people or injuring them. But I want to focus on the slavery part to start. So actually, before we get to the commentary, let's go back to starting with verse 2. Right, so you acquire a Hebrew slave, and the phrasing there is the masculine form. And the idea is that when you have a Hebrew slave, he will serve you for 6 years. Where do Hebrew slaves come from? Right, I mean, is this like when you acquire a Hebrew slave, does that mean you have gone next door with a rope and you caught your neighbor and you tie him up and you say, "You're my slave now"?
You defeat him in war.
No,
One Hebrew person to another Hebrew person? Right.
But
So,
maybe
well, we did unfortunately fight each other, but the taking of slaves in war between the Hebrew tribes was absolutely prohibited. So where are these slaves coming
Maybe
from?
you're someone who really
They're in debt.
Yeah.
All right. So there are a couple of ways for someone to become a slave. One is for debt. Well, I mean, technically, all of them are going to be for debt, but the way the debt comes is different. So there is debt just because you have no financial luck, right? So your field gets wiped out by a flood or by locusts or something like that, or your field just isn't that productive, or you're lazy and you didn't grow your food well enough and you didn't work hard enough, and now you've got not enough food. You're going to starve to death. What do? Well, you sell yourself, right? You need something to eat, and so you pre-sale your labor to someone else for however many years are left between now and the sabbatical, the 7th year, right? So you say, okay, look, I made a complete mess of this, or just, the flood took everything from me and I've got nothing left. And even if someone gave me charity, I'm going to need it every single day to get back on my feet, and no one's been able to give me a loan big enough that I can replant. So I'm just going to have to bite the bullet for someone else for the next 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years. And then hopefully I'll be able to get back on my feet after that when the sabbatical comes.
Chapter 11.
Well, it's almost like a bankruptcy, Chapter 11.
But
Right.
at this point, if your land isn't growing anything, fine, you go and you're being fed and whatever. But what about the people who you left on your land here? If you had a wife or children or something?
We will get to them.
Yeah.
We will get to them. But the odd part of this is that this is very much like a form of extreme prepaid salary work, right? It's you are basically under contract to work 24/7, well, 24/6. Got Shabbat.
Oh, that's right.
Did we have someone at the door?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, was the door locked?
Yeah.
Yeah, we pulled it closed because the rain was so noisy, but that little button, sometimes it gets stuck.
Yeah.
We're chapter 21 of Exodus. We're doing, in Mishpatim, we're talking about the laws of slavery. And as we were just talking,
Yes.
Yeah. As we were just discussing, there's one under that other, there we go. Someone might choose to sell themselves because their economic circumstances had forced them into basically either having to live as a beggar or finding someone who would say, all right, look, I will hire you, I'll pay you, right? I will buy you from yourself. I am buying your labor for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, however much is left until the sabbatical, and that would affect the price. And you will work for me. And you'll have to do what I say, and you'll have to live here with me and do this work. And there are limits, and the Torah lays them out. I'm not allowed to knock your teeth out or, poke your eye out or torture you or something. But you are going to have to work. So if I tell you to go pick up after the donkey, you're going to go pick up after the donkey. And if I tell you to stay up and keep the chickens warm, you're going to stay up all night and keep the chickens warm. That's what your job is going to be. So it's not a great job, right? This is not like being a modern salaried employer where you could just say, you know what, I quit. I don't like your work that you're giving. No, once you make this deal, you are in it. And that was there to mitigate the cost and the risk associated with hiring someone like this, because the owner of the slave was taking on a risk of, this is a person who they're now going to be forced to feed and to give clothing and to give a place to live, and they needed to be able to say, labor back from this person that is worth at least or more what I paid for them to come work for me for this amount of time.
When you say paid, you mean room and board only. They don't get a salary.
No, they're there. Well, it depends on the negotiation, but the person is selling themselves. So they will get something when they get sold. And we find out much later on in Deuteronomy as well that when a slave goes free, the owner is also supposed to give them a gift as they leave. But there is probably also additional cash involved in the sale of oneself. Now,
Indentured servitude as opposed to slavery.
ish. Right. So, well, it's indentured servitude plus, because there are certain aspects, which we're going to see very quickly, involving wives, that most indentured servitude contracts didn't have, at least with the American experience. But it is definitely an idea that the person has taken on a risk by paying in advance for your services, and you therefore are bound, you're a bondsman, to serve them for this period of time.
Right. In my country,
Mhm.
El Salvador, my father, for example, we have people who work for us.
Right.
People who have big business and everything. And my dad need people.
Right.
But he paid them.
Right.
They live in the house. The house is huge.
Right.
And they live there, same as
Mhm.
I ate, they ate.
Right.
And they don't want to go.
Right.
Because
Why would they? It's a good job.
My point is that considering slavery?
No, because I'm guessing that if they wanted to go, they could go anytime.
Oh yeah.
Right. So if they said, you know what, my sister, she's moved to another city and she's opened up a shop and she wants me to work with her, so I'm going to move to the city and work with her. But thank you so much for being so kind, and that's okay. Then that's not the same. Right. These people were stuck where they were stuck, And indeed, the owner could, in some circumstances, we're going to get into that, especially with regards to women, they could sell the person, right? So let's say I sell myself to Mr. Smith, and I'm working for Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith decides he doesn't need my extra work. Maybe his field's not doing so well. He can sell me to Mr. Frank. And then I have to go work for Mr. Frank. But my contract is still going to expire at the sabbatical. Right, Mr. Frank doesn't get an additional bunch of years. It's still going to go and that sabbatical. Okay, so that's the general rule of how most people would get into this slavery status. But there was another type of debt that could get you there, and that's called theft. Right, remember, the penalty for theft is to pay back 4 or 5 times what you stole. And for many people, they wouldn't be able to afford that. And so how do you get the value from them that they owe the victim of their crime? You make them work it off. You sell them, and then the court takes whatever the money they got for selling the person, and they give it to the victim. And then that person has to go work as a slave. And that was the alternative to prison, because we didn't have anything called prison. There was no idea of putting someone in a box and keeping them there for 5 years. And feeding them, and then when they were done, letting them out and saying, there. We didn't do that, right? You took the person, you took their value, literally the value of their person, you gave it to the victim, and you put that person to work, and then when the sabbatical was done, all debts were clear, and they're free again. All right. How are we doing on this? What's that? Better than cutting their hands off?
Oh.
I think we can definitely agree on that. Judaism never had any forms of permanent mutilation or capital crime, God forbid, or capital punishment for a monetary crime. That was something for Europe to do until the 20th century. It's sometimes hard to remember just how barbaric Europe had been all the way up until the modern times. They were still hanging people for stealing sheep. What's that? And there are parts of the world that still do, absolutely. But we've had a longer relationship with Europe and have often been called barbaric by Europe, enough that we can sometimes scratch our head and say, excuse me, who was still publicly hanging people for stealing stuff when we knew that was wrong for more than 3,000 years? Which is the barbarian here. But this, I hope, also does make you feel uncomfortable, because this idea of a person having to sell themselves into service or sell a family member into service just seems very hard to accept and swallow. And the truth is, we shouldn't accept this now. Nowadays, we have alternatives that can help both people who are either thieves or people who have gotten into debt that they can't handle on their own. We have better ways to get them out of this. But in the agrarian economy of ancient Israel, and in the mostly pre-monetary economy, where not a lot of people had a lot of cash that they could just hand to someone to go reseed their fields or do something like that, this was one of the only mechanisms by which people could help other people. And the limits on the person doing the service, the slave, were required in order to make sure that people would be willing to take on the burden of the person in exchange for their service. So it's very hard to appreciate exactly what it was like, because we are so distant from the ancient economy. But this was a good solution for a bad problem at a time that had very few solutions available to them. We have much better solutions and many more choices of how to deal with these types of problems today. So it's no longer the ideal solution in our modern society. But, and looking at the clock again, we need to get cracking on some of this commentary, and that'll take us through our review. But the commentators also wanted to make sure that we understood exactly what was happening here, because some of it is mitigated in ways that may not be obvious on our first read. All right, we got it all the way around, just about. Okay, so first little quote comes from Rashi.
The Holy One told Moses, "Do not think